My name is Dorothy, and I am 68 years old. Until 6 months ago, I lived in the same house I had called home for 37 years, the house where I raised my son Thomas and built a life with my late husband Frank. But when Frank passed away from cancer, and the loneliness became too much to bear, Thomas and his wife Jessica convinced me that moving in with them would be the best solution for everyone. "Mom, you shouldn't be alone in that big house," Thomas had said, his voice full of concern and love. "Come stay with us. We have plenty of room and it would be good for the kids to spend more time with their grandmother." Jessica had nodded enthusiastically, her smile bright and welcoming. "Dorothy, we would love to have you. The guest room is perfect for you, and you won't have to worry about maintaining that big property all by yourself." At the time, it seemed like the perfect arrangement. I would rent out my house to cover the expenses and have some income, while living with my family and helping with my grandchildren, Emma and Jake, ages 8 and 10. Thomas assured me that it was temporary, just until I felt ready to make more permanent decisions about my living situation. What I didn't tell them, what I had never told anyone, was that the house they were so generously inviting me into was actually mine. Not theirs, mine. I had purchased it 15 years ago as an investment property when the previous owners were facing foreclosure. At the time, Thomas and Jessica were newlyweds struggling financially, and I had quietly bought the house and allowed them to live there rent-free, telling them it belonged to Frank's brother who was letting them stay as a favor. The lie had started small, intended to preserve their dignity and independence. Young couples need to feel like they're making their own way in the world, and I knew that if Thomas and Jessica understood they were living in a house his mother owned, it would create tension and resentment that could damage our relationship. So I created the fiction of Uncle Robert's generosity, complete with fake rental agreements and manufactured correspondence. Over the years, as Thomas's career improved and their financial situation stabilized, I had several opportunities to tell them the truth. But the longer the lie continued, the more complicated it became to unravel. How do you tell your son and daughter-in-law that they've been living in your house for 15 years without knowing it? How do you explain that every improvement they've made, every dollar they've spent on maintenance, every memory they've created has been in a space that legally belongs to you? So I kept the secret, even as it became increasingly awkward. When they talked about eventually buying the house from Uncle Robert, I would redirect the conversation. When they made plans for renovations and improvements, I would encourage them while privately noting that they were improving my property. When Jessica would complain about the mortgage payments they were supposedly making to the bank, I would sympathize while knowing that the house had been paid off for over a decade. The arrangement worked well for the first few months after I moved in. I had the guest bedroom on the first floor, a comfortable space with its own bathroom and easy access to the common areas. I tried to be helpful without being intrusive, cooking dinners, helping with laundry, babysitting Emma and Jake when Thomas and Jessica needed evenings out. But as the weeks passed, I began to notice subtle changes in Jessica's behavior toward me. Small comments about how much food I was eating, suggestions that I should contribute more to the grocery budget, hints that having a third adult in the house was more complicated than she had expected. "Dorothy, I've been thinking," she said one morning as we were having coffee together, "maybe we should establish some clearer boundaries about household responsibilities. So we're all on the same page about expectations." I agreed, thinking this was a reasonable request. "Of course, Jessica, what did you have in mind?" "Well, for starters, I think you should take over more of the cooking and cleaning, since you're here all day and we're both working full-time. And maybe contribute a bit more financially, to cover the extra utilities and food costs." The request seemed fair on the surface, but something about the way she presented it made me uncomfortable. It felt less like a conversation between family members trying to work out logistics, and more like a landlord imposing conditions on a difficult tenant. "I'm happy to help more," I said carefully, "but I want to make sure we're being reasonable. I'm already cooking most dinners and helping with the children's care." Jessica's smile became a little tighter. "Dorothy, I appreciate what you do, but you have to understand that having you here is an adjustment for all of us. Thomas and I are used to having our space, our routines. We're trying to make this work, but it requires compromise from everyone." The word compromise hung in the air between us, and I realized that in Jessica's mind, I was the one who needed to do all the compromising. She wasn't seeing this as a mutual arrangement to benefit everyone. She was seeing it as a favor they were doing for me, and favors come with conditions. Over the following weeks, those conditions became increasingly specific and demeaning. Jessica would leave lists of chores for me to complete, as if I were household help rather than family. She would comment on how long I spent in the bathroom in the morning, suggesting that I should adjust my routine to accommodate her schedule. She started referring to meals I cooked as Dorothy's cooking experiments, with a tone that implied they were barely acceptable. The most painful changes, though, were in how she treated me in front of the children. Emma and Jake had always been affectionate with me, excited to have their grandmother living with them. But Jessica began discouraging their interactions with me, suggesting that they shouldn't bother me with their problems, that they should ask their parents for help instead of their grandmother. "Kids, let Grandma Dorothy rest," she would say when they wanted to show me their homework or tell me about their day. "She's tired and we don't want to wear her out." Gradually, I found myself spending more and more time in my room, trying to avoid the increasingly uncomfortable atmosphere in the common areas of the house. Jessica had made it clear that my presence was tolerated rather than welcomed, and I didn't want to create additional tension that might affect Thomas or the children. Thomas, for his part, seemed oblivious to the growing hostility between his wife and his mother. When I tried to bring up some of Jessica's behavior, he would dismiss my concerns with well-meaning but unhelpful advice. "Mom, Jessica's just stressed about work right now," he would say. "She doesn't mean anything by it, you know how she gets when she's under pressure." "Thomas, I think there might be some resentment about me living here," I would try to explain. "Maybe we should talk about other arrangements." "Don't be silly, Mom. Jessica loves having you here. She's just particular about how things are done, that's all. Give her some time to adjust." But Jessica wasn't adjusting. If anything, her treatment of me was becoming more openly hostile. She began making comments about how much space my belongings took up, how my presence disrupted their family routines, how difficult it was to maintain their lifestyle with a third adult in the house. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in November, 6 months after I had moved in. I was in my room, reading a book and trying to stay out of everyone's way, when Jessica knocked on my door. "Dorothy, I need to talk to you," she said, her tone businesslike and cold. I invited her in, but she remained standing in the doorway as if entering my room would somehow contaminate her. "I've been doing some thinking about the household arrangements," she began, "and I think we need to make some changes." "What kind of changes?" I asked, though something in her expression told me I wasn't going to like her answer. "Well, Thomas and I have been talking, and we think it would be better for everyone if you moved your things out of this room. We need the space for storage, and honestly, you spend so much time in here anyway that it's basically wasted on you." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "Jessica, this is my bedroom. Where exactly am I supposed to sleep?" "Oh, you can use the couch in the living room," she said dismissively. "It pulls out into a bed, and since you're up so early anyway, it won't be an inconvenience for anyone. Plus, this room has the built-in closets and the attached bathroom, which makes it perfect for storage." The casual cruelty of her suggestion took my breath away. She was proposing to turn me out of my bedroom and onto a pull-out couch like I was a college student crashing at a friend's apartment, not a 68-year-old woman who was supposedly a welcomed family member. "Jessica, I don't think that's reasonable," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This arrangement was supposed to be temporary, but it was also supposed to include a proper bedroom for me." "Dorothy," she said, her voice taking on the patient tone people use when explaining something to a slow child, "you need to be realistic about your situation here. Thomas and I are doing you a favor by letting you stay, but that doesn't mean we have to sacrifice our own needs and comfort indefinitely. This room is wasted on someone who's just going to be here temporarily anyway." "And what does Thomas think about this?" I asked. Jessica's smile became sharp and triumphant. "Thomas agrees with me that we need to make better use of the space. He understands that this is our house and we have the right to organize it in a way that works best for our family." The emphasis she placed on our house was unmistakable. She was reminding me that I was an outsider, a guest who had overstayed her welcome and needed to accept whatever accommodations the real residents were willing to provide. "I see," I said quietly. "And when exactly do you want me to make this transition?" "This weekend would be good," Jessica said. "I've already ordered some shelving units and I want to get everything organized before the holidays." She left my room without waiting for a response, apparently considering the matter settled. I sat on my bed, looking around the space that had been my sanctuary for 6 months, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: pure, undiluted anger. Not the sadness and disappointment I had felt as Jessica's treatment of me had gradually worsened, but actual rage at the arrogance and cruelty of a woman who thought she could reduce me to sleeping on a couch because my bedroom was more useful as a storage closet. That evening, I called my lawyer, Martin Hendricks, who had handled my legal affairs for the past 20 years. Martin had been the one who helped me structure the original purchase of Thomas's house, and he was one of the few people who knew the truth about the ownership situation. "Dorothy," he said when I explained the situation, "I have to ask why you never told Thomas and Jessica that they're living in your house. This could have been avoided if they understood the actual arrangement." "I wanted to preserve their dignity," I said. "But I think it's time they learned the truth." "Are you sure you want to do this? Once you reveal the ownership, there's no going back to the previous arrangement. This is going to change your relationship with them permanently." I thought about Jessica's casual dismissal of my needs, her assumption that I should be grateful for whatever scraps of consideration she chose to offer me, her complete lack of respect for my dignity as a human being and as her husband's mother. "Martin," I said, "my daughter-in-law just told me that my bedroom is going to become a storage room and I should sleep on the couch. I think our relationship has already changed permanently." "Fair enough," Martin said. "Do you want me to handle this, or do you want to tell them yourself?" "I want to tell them myself," I said, "but I want you to prepare all the documentation so there's no confusion about the legal situation." "I'll have everything ready by tomorrow," Martin said. "Dorothy, are you prepared for the possibility that this might end your living arrangement with them? They're going to be shocked and probably embarrassed, and that could manifest as anger." "I'm prepared for that," I said. "At this point, I'd rather live alone with my dignity intact than continue living here as Jessica's unwanted charity case." The next morning, Martin delivered a complete set of documents to my temporary residence. The original purchase agreement showing my name as the buyer, the deed showing my ownership of the property, 15 years of property tax payments made from my accounts, insurance documents listing me as the policyholder, and a detailed legal summary of the ownership situation. I spent the day reviewing the papers and thinking about how to handle the conversation with Thomas and Jessica. I didn't want to humiliate them unnecessarily, but I also needed them to understand that their assumptions about our arrangement had been completely incorrect from the beginning. That evening, as we were finishing dinner, Jessica brought up the storage room conversion again. "Dorothy, I hope you've had time to think about our conversation yesterday. I'd like to start moving your things out of the bedroom this weekend so we can get the storage organized." "Actually," I said calmly, "I've had some time to think about our entire living arrangement, and I believe there are some things we need to discuss." Thomas looked up from his plate, sensing tension. "What kind of things, Mom?" "Well," I said, pulling out the folder of documents Martin had prepared, "I think it's time I told you both the truth about this house." Jessica laughed, a sound that had no humor in it. "What truth?" "Dorothy, this is our house. We've been living here for 15 years, making payments, maintaining it, improving it. I don't know what kind of truth you think you have about our home." "The truth," I said evenly, "is that this isn't your house, Jessica. It's mine, it's been mine for 15 years, and your name has never been on the deed." The silence that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Thomas stared at me with his mouth slightly open, as if he couldn't process what I had just said. Jessica's expression went from amused condescension to confusion to something approaching panic. "Mom," Thomas said slowly, "what are you talking about? This house belongs to Uncle Robert. We've been renting it from him since we got married." "There is no rental arrangement with Uncle Robert," I said gently. "Uncle Robert doesn't own this house, he never owned this house. I bought this house 15 years ago when the previous owners were facing foreclosure, and I've been letting you live here rent-free ever since." Jessica found her voice first. "That's impossible, we make mortgage payments every month. We have insurance, we pay property taxes, we've spent thousands of dollars on improvements." I opened the folder and spread the documents across the dining table. "You make payments to a savings account I set up to collect them. I pay the actual mortgage, which was paid off 8 years ago. I pay the property taxes, I carry the insurance policy, and every improvement you've made has been to my house." Thomas picked up the deed, reading his mother's name where he had expected to see his uncle's. "Mom, I don't understand. Why would you do this? Why wouldn't you tell us?" "Because," I said, 15 years ago you were young and struggling, and I wanted to help you without damaging your pride or independence. I thought it would be temporary, that eventually you'd buy your own place and I could tell you the truth. But years passed, you put down roots here, the children were born here, and it became harder and harder to explain." Jessica was shaking her head, her face pale. "This can't be legal. You can't just buy someone's house without them knowing it. There have to be contracts, agreements, legal procedures." "There are," I said, pointing to the documents. "All handled by my lawyer, all completely legal and documented. This house has been mine for 15 years, Jessica. You've been living in my house for 15 years. The implications of this revelation were sinking in, and Jessica's expression was shifting from confusion to something that looked like fear. "But we've invested so much money in this place. The kitchen renovation, the new bathrooms, the deck, the landscaping, that's our money, our labor." "Yes," I agreed, "and I've appreciated every improvement you've made to my property. The house is worth significantly more now because of your efforts." Thomas was still staring at the deed. "Mom, if this house is yours, if it's been yours all along, then what does that mean for us? For our family?" It was the question I had been dreading and anticipating for months. "It means," I said, "that we need to have a different conversation about living arrangements. It means that Jessica's decision to turn my bedroom into a storage room while I sleep on the couch is not her decision to make." Jessica's face flushed red. "You can't be serious, you're going to use this to blackmail us. To force us to let you stay here." "I'm not blackmailing anyone," I said calmly. "I'm simply correcting your understanding of the situation. This morning, you told me that this was your house and you had the right to organize it however you wanted. I'm telling you that you were wrong about whose house this is. Thomas looked between his mother and his wife, clearly struggling to process the new reality. Mom, what do you want from us? What are you asking for? I'm asking, I said, for the basic respect and consideration that any homeowner has the right to expect from people living in their house. I'm asking not to be treated like an unwelcome charity case who should be grateful for whatever accommodation you're willing to provide. Jessica stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. You've been lying to us for 15 years, letting us believe we owned our own home, taking our money under false pretenses, and now you want to use that lie to control how we live. Jessica, I said, my voice still calm but with an edge that hadn't been there before. Yesterday you told me that my bedroom was going to become a storage room. Today I'm telling you that your bedroom is in my house. I think that gives us both some new perspective on who has the right to make decisions about living arrangements. The conversation that followed was unlike anything our family had ever experienced. Thomas alternated between shock, embarrassment, and a kind of bewildered hurt that his mother had kept such a significant secret for so long. Jessica cycled through disbelief, anger, and what appeared to be genuine panic as she realized the implications of living in a house owned by someone she had been treating with increasing hostility. I need to call Uncle Robert, Thomas said at one point. I need to understand what his role in this has been. Uncle Robert doesn't know anything about this, I told him. I never involved him in the arrangement. The entire story about him owning the house and renting it to you was something I created to explain the situation without revealing the truth. Jessica was pacing around the kitchen, her hands shaking. 15 years. 15 years we've been living a lie. 15 years of thinking we were building equity in our own home, making decisions about our own property, planning our future based on completely false information. Yes, I said, and I understand how shocking this must be. But Jessica, I want you to think about something. For 15 years, you've lived in a beautiful house with no real housing costs, no risk of foreclosure, no worry about property taxes or major repairs. For 15 years, you've had the security and stability of homeownership without any of the actual financial burden. But we didn't know that, Thomas said. We thought we were paying for all of it ourselves. We thought we were responsible, independent adults managing our own household. You were responsible, independent adults, I said. You maintained the property, improved it, raised your children here, built a life here. The only difference is that I was quietly ensuring you never had to worry about losing it. Jessica stopped pacing and turned to face me. And now, what happens now? Do you want us to move out? Do you want us to start paying you rent? Do you want to sell the house? What exactly is your plan here, Dorothy? It was a fair question, and one I had been thinking about since my conversation with Martin. What I want, I said, is for us to figure out an arrangement that works for everyone and is based on honesty instead of deception. What I don't want is to be treated like an unwelcome guest in my own house. So you're saying that if we treat you better, you'll let us keep living here? Jessica asked. I'm saying that we need to acknowledge the reality of our situation and move forward with mutual respect and understanding. Yesterday, you thought you had the right to turn my bedroom into a storage room because you believed this was your house. Today, you know it's my house. That changes things. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, then looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course. Did you plan this? Did you move in here knowing that eventually Jessica would push you too far and you'd have to reveal the truth about the house? The question caught me off guard, and I realized that Thomas was wondering whether his mother had been manipulating the situation from the beginning. No, I said. When I moved in here, I genuinely thought I might be able to continue the arrangement indefinitely without having to tell you the truth. I hoped that we could live together as family and the ownership issue wouldn't matter. But it does matter, Jessica said. It matters because it means everything we thought we knew about our lives has been a lie. Not everything, I said. Your marriage is real, your children are real, your careers, your friendships, your community connections are all real. The only lie was about who owned the house you were living in. Only, Jessica's voice was rising. Dorothy, this house is where we brought our babies home from the hospital. This is where Emma took her first steps, where Jake learned to ride his bike. This is where we've celebrated every holiday, every birthday, every milestone for 15 years. And now you're telling us that none of it was really ours. I looked at Jessica, and for the first time since this conversation had begun, I felt something other than anger toward her. I felt genuine sadness for the shock and disorientation she was experiencing, even though her behavior toward me had made this revelation necessary. Jessica, I said gently, those memories are yours. Those experiences belong to you and your family. The deed to the house doesn't change any of that. But it changes everything else, Thomas said. It changes how we see ourselves, how we understand our own accomplishments, how we plan for the future. Does it? I asked. Thomas, you've built a successful career, raised two wonderful children, maintained a beautiful home, and created a stable, loving family. How does knowing that I own the house change any of that? Because, Jessica said, her voice breaking slightly, it means we've been living on charity without knowing it. It means we've been fooling ourselves about our own independence and success. I understood then what was really bothering them, beyond the shock of the revelation itself. They felt that their accomplishments had been diminished, that their pride in their own self-sufficiency had been based on false information. Listen to me, both of you, I said, standing up and walking around the table to where they were sitting. You are not charity cases, and you never have been. I bought this house as an investment, and over 15 years you have maintained it, improved it, and increased its value far beyond what I paid for it. You've been excellent tenants, even though you didn't know that's what you were. But we never paid you rent, Thomas pointed out. No, I agreed, you didn't, but you paid property taxes, insurance, utilities, and maintenance costs that added up to more than market rent would have been. And more importantly, you gave me the peace of mind of knowing that my investment was in good hands. Jessica wiped her eyes and looked at me with an expression that was still angry but also confused. Dorothy, if this is all true, if you really bought this house as an investment and we've been good tenants, then why reveal it now? Why not just continue the arrangement? Because, I said, sitting back down, yesterday you told me that my bedroom was going to become a storage room and I should sleep on a couch. Because you've been treating me like an unwelcome burden instead of family. Because I'm too old to live in my own house and pretend to be grateful for whatever accommodations you decide to offer me. The room fell silent again. Emma and Jake had been upstairs during this entire conversation, probably doing homework or playing video games, oblivious to the fact that their entire understanding of their living situation had just been turned upside down. Finally, Thomas spoke. So what happens now, Mom? What do you want from us going forward? I want us to start over, I said. I want us to acknowledge that this is my house, that you've been living here as my tenants, and that I've been happy to have you here. But I also want you to understand that I'm not living here as your dependent. I'm living in my own house, and I expect to be treated with the respect that any homeowner deserves. Jessica looked at me with something that might have been the beginning of understanding. And if we can't do that, if this situation is too awkward or complicated for us to navigate, then we'll figure out alternative arrangements, I said. You can buy the house from me at fair market value, or you can find another place to live, or we can work out some other solution that feels fair to everyone. And if we want to stay, Thomas asked. If we want to try to make this work. I looked at my son, this man I had raised and loved and worried about for 35 years, and realized that our relationship was about to change in ways none of us could fully predict. If you want to stay, I said, then we start with honesty and mutual respect. We acknowledge what our real relationship is and we build from there. Over the following weeks, Thomas and Jessica struggled to adjust to their new understanding of their living situation. The revelation that they had been living in Dorothy's house for 15 years had shaken their sense of identity and accomplishment in ways that went far beyond the practical implications. Jessica, in particular, seemed to fluctuate between embarrassment about how she had treated me and resentment about the deception that had made her treatment possible. She had several conversations with Thomas about whether they should move out immediately, whether they could ever feel comfortable living in a house owned by his mother, whether their children would be confused or upset by the change in circumstances. Thomas was dealing with his own complicated feelings about having been kept in the dark for so long. He understood intellectually why I had created the fiction about Uncle Robert, but emotionally, he felt deceived and infantilized, as if his mother had been treating him like a child who couldn't handle the truth about his own living situation. But something interesting began to happen as the initial shock wore off. With the truth finally out in the open, we were able to have conversations about our living arrangement that had been impossible when it was based on a fundamental lie. Jessica apologized for her behavior toward me, acknowledging that she had been taking out her own frustrations and insecurities on someone she perceived as dependent and powerless. Dorothy, she said one evening, I'm ashamed of how I treated you. I convinced myself that you were a burden we were carrying out of obligation, and I used that to justify being cruel to you. Thank you for saying that, I said. But I want you to understand that I don't think you're a bad person, Jessica. I think you were operating on false information, and that led you to see our situation in a way that brought out some of your worst instincts. Thomas asked more practical questions about the financial arrangements, wanting to understand exactly what costs I had been covering and what costs they had been responsible for. When he realized how much money I had quietly spent on their behalf over the years, he insisted on starting to pay market-rate rent going forward. Mom, I can't let you continue to subsidize our housing, he said. We're adults, we have good incomes, and we should be paying our own way. Thomas, I said, if you want to pay rent, that's fine, but don't do it because you think you owe me something. Do it because it makes you feel more comfortable with the arrangement. I do want to pay rent, he said, and I want us to have a proper landlord-tenant agreement, something legal and formal that protects both of us. We worked with Martin to draft a lease agreement that felt fair to everyone. Thomas and Jessica would pay market-rate rent, but they would continue to be responsible for maintenance and improvements, with the understanding that major renovations would require my approval as the homeowner. The children, when we finally told them about the change in circumstances, were surprisingly adaptable. Emma asked if this meant Grandma Dorothy was their landlord now, and when we said yes, she wanted to know if that meant they could ask her to fix things that were broken instead of waiting for their parents to get around to it. Jake was more concerned about whether the revelation meant they would have to move, and he was visibly relieved when we assured him that they could stay as long as everyone was happy with the arrangement. But the most significant change was in how Jessica and I related to each other. With the power dynamics finally out in the open and acknowledged, she stopped treating me like a dependent and started treating me like a person with agency and authority. She asked my permission before making changes to common areas of the house, consulted with me about household decisions that affected everyone, and made an effort to include me in family activities instead of tolerating my presence. 6 months after the storage room conversation, Jessica approached me with a proposal that I never could have imagined during those difficult early days. "Dorothy," she said, "I've been thinking about our living arrangement, and I have an idea I want to run by you." "What kind of ideas?" "Well, you know how you've been talking about maybe doing some traveling, seeing more of the country. What if, when you travel, you rented out your old house as a vacation rental instead of just having long-term tenants? You could make more money, and you'd have more flexibility to go back to it when you want to." It was a thoughtful suggestion that took into account both my financial interests and my desire for more freedom and mobility. "That's actually a really good idea," I said. "Have you been researching vacation rental markets?" "A little bit," Jessica admitted. "I was thinking that if you wanted to try it, I could help you manage the bookings and the cleaning between guests. As a business partnership, not just as a favor." The conversation that grew out of this suggestion led to a complete restructuring of our relationship. Jessica and I became partners in managing both properties, the house they lived in and my original house, which we converted into a successful vacation rental. Instead of being landlord and tenant, or mother-in-law and daughter-in-law with a complicated housing arrangement, we became business partners with complementary skills and shared interests. Thomas was initially skeptical about his wife and mother going into business together, but as the vacation rental began generating significant income in Jessica, and I developed a working relationship based on mutual respect and shared goals, he became one of our biggest supporters. A year after the storage room incident, we were having a family dinner to celebrate the success of our first full year in the vacation rental business. The conversation turned to how much our family dynamics had changed over the past year. "Mom," Thomas said, raising his glass, "I want to make a toast to honesty, even when it's uncomfortable, and to second chances, even when we don't think we deserve them." Jessica raised her glass as well. "And to learning that strength doesn't always look the way we expect it to. Dorothy, you taught me that quiet dignity can be more powerful than loud demands." I looked around the table at my family, thinking about how much had changed since that morning when Jessica had told me my bedroom would become a storage room. We had all learned things about ourselves and each other that we never could have learned if the truth had remained hidden. "I want to toast something else," I said, "to the understanding that love doesn't require deception and that respect doesn't diminish independence. We're a stronger family now that we know who we really are to each other." Emma, now 9 years old, piped up from her end of the table. "Grandma Dorothy, does this mean you're not going to sell our house?" "This is your house, sweetheart," I said. "As long as your parents want to live here, and as long as we can all treat each other with kindness and respect, this will be your house." Jake, now 11 and always practical, had a different question. "Does this mean that when I grow up, I can live in one of your houses too?" The adults all laughed, but I answered him seriously. "Jake, when you grow up, you'll make your own choices about where to live. But I hope that whatever choices you make, you'll remember that family means supporting each other honestly, not managing each other dishonestly." Later that evening, after Thomas and Jessica had put the children to bed and we were cleaning up from dinner, Jessica brought up something that had been on her mind for months. "Dorothy, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." "Always," I said. "When you moved in here, when I started treating you badly, did you know you were going to reveal the truth about the house? Did you plan for me to push you too far so you'd have an excuse to put me in my place?" It was a fair question, and one I had asked myself many times over the past year. "Jessica, I honestly don't know if there was some part of me that was hoping for an opportunity to correct the power imbalance between us. But I can tell you that when you told me my bedroom was going to become a storage room, I wasn't thinking about strategy or manipulation. I was thinking about dignity." What do you mean? I mean that at 68 years old, after raising a family and building a life and taking care of myself for decades, I wasn't going to let anyone treat me like I was worthless. Not even family, not even people I loved. Jessica nodded slowly. I think I understand now why you didn't tell us about the house for so long. You were protecting our pride, but you were also protecting yourself from having to use your power in ways that might damage our relationships. Exactly, I said. I hoped we could all live together without anyone having to assert dominance or claim territory. But when that became impossible, I chose my own dignity over your comfort, and I'm not sorry about that choice. I don't want you to be sorry, Jessica said. I'm glad you stood up for yourself, even though it was embarrassing for me. I needed to learn that lesson, and I probably couldn't have learned it any other way. 2 years after the storage room revelation, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I decided to gift the house to Thomas and Jessica, transferring the deed to their names with no strings attached. The decision came after months of watching them struggle with the psychological weight of living in a house owned by Thomas's mother, despite the fact that our new arrangement was working well for everyone involved. Mom, we can't accept this, Thomas said when I told them about my decision. This house is worth more than we could ever repay you for. I'm not asking you to repay me, I said. I'm giving you something I can afford to give, something that will make your lives more secure and my life more flexible. But Dorothy, Jessica protested, this is too much. You've already given us 15 years of free housing. We can't let you give us the house itself. You're not letting me do anything, I said. I'm choosing to do this because it makes sense for everyone. You get the security of homeownership, I get the freedom of not being a landlord, and our grandchildren get to grow up in a house that truly belongs to their family. The conversation about the gift led to many other conversations about inheritance, family wealth, and what we owe each other across generations. I had come to realize that my original deception, while well-intentioned, had deprived Thomas and Jessica of the opportunity to feel truly grateful for the help they had received, and had prevented me from feeling appreciated for the help I had given. The truth is, I told them, I bought this house not just as an investment, but as a way of taking care of my family. I wanted you to have stability and security, but I also wanted to feel like I was contributing to your success and happiness. By hiding my role in your housing situation, I deprived both of us of the satisfaction that comes from honest generosity and honest gratitude. When the deed transfer was complete, we had another family celebration, this time to mark the official transition of the house from my ownership to theirs. But we also celebrated something more important, the transition of our relationships from ones based on hidden power dynamics to ones based on open communication and mutual respect. Grandma Dorothy, Emma said at that dinner, now that Mom and Dad own the house, does that mean you're just visiting when you stay here? No, sweetheart, I said. It means I'm family and family is always welcome here. But where do you live now? Jake asked, still trying to understand the practical implications. I live wherever I choose to live, I said. Sometimes here with you, sometimes in my other house, sometimes traveling to new places. The wonderful thing about being my age is that I get to decide what home means to me. 3 years after Jessica had told me my room would become storage, I was sitting in that same room, now permanently mine again, writing in a journal about the lessons I had learned from one of the most difficult and transformative periods of my life. I had learned that keeping secrets, even well-intentioned ones, creates imbalances in relationships that eventually have to be corrected. I had learned that family love doesn't automatically translate into family respect, and that respect has to be earned and maintained by everyone involved, regardless of age or relationship. Most importantly, I had learned that dignity is not something that can be given or taken away by other people. It's something that comes from within, from knowing your own worth and insisting that others recognize it as well. Jessica knocked on my door that evening, interrupting my writing. Dorothy, can I come in? Of course. She sat down on the chair by the window, the same chair where she had stood 3 years earlier to tell me this room would become storage. I've been thinking about something, she said, and I wanted to share it with you. What's that? I've been thinking about how different my life would have been if you hadn't bought this house, if you hadn't given us the stability and security that allowed us to build our family here. And I realized that I never really thanked you for that. Jessica, you don't need to. Yes, I do, she interrupted. Not just for the house, but for the way you handled the situation when I was treating you badly. You could have humiliated me, could have thrown me out, could have made me feel small and powerless. Instead, you used your power to teach me about respect and dignity, and you gave me the chance to become a better person. I looked at this woman who had once told me my bedroom would become a storage room, who had made me feel unwelcome in my own house, who had learned to see me as a full human being with agency and worth. Jessica, I said, you did become a better person, but that was your choice, not something I made happen. I just gave you the information you needed to make better choices. The information I needed, she repeated thoughtfully. That's an interesting way to put it. What do you mean? I mean, that's what you've always done, isn't it? You give people the information they need to make good choices, but you let them make the choices themselves. You bought the house and let us live here, but you didn't control how we lived. You revealed the truth about the ownership when I pushed too far, but you didn't use it to punish me. You offered to give us the house, but you didn't make it conditional on our behavior. I had never thought about my approach in those terms, but Jessica's observation made me reflect on the patterns in my relationships with my family and others. I suppose, I said, I've learned that you can't force people to treat you well, but you can make sure they have accurate information about the consequences of treating you badly. And that, Jessica said, smiling, is why Emma and Jake are going to grow up understanding that their grandmother is someone to be respected, not just loved. That conversation happened 5 years ago. Today, I am 73 years old and I spend my time traveling, managing my vacation rental property, volunteering with organizations that help seniors navigate housing issues, and enjoying my family from a position of mutual respect and affection. Emma is now 14, and when her friends ask her about her living situation, she explains matter-of-factly that her family owns their house now, but that her grandmother originally bought it for them before they could afford it themselves. She talks about this family history with pride, not embarrassment, because she has learned that accepting help gracefully is a sign of wisdom, not weakness. Jake is 16, and he has started working part-time helping me manage the vacation rental. He has learned about property management, customer service, and small business operations, and he talks sometimes about maybe studying real estate or hospitality management in college. He has seen firsthand how property ownership can provide financial security and independence, and he has also learned that generosity and business success are not mutually exclusive. Thomas has become one of my closest advisors on financial matters, and we work together to make decisions about property investments and family financial planning. Our relationship has deepened in ways that wouldn't have been possible when he didn't know the full extent of my resources or my role in his family's stability. And Jessica has become not just a daughter-in-law, but a genuine friend and business partner. We travel together sometimes, exploring potential new markets for vacation rentals. We have developed a working relationship based on mutual respect, shared goals, and honest communication about both business and family matters. But perhaps most importantly, I have become an example in our family of what it looks like to age with dignity, independence, and purpose. I am not the frail, dependent elderly woman that society often expects me to be. I am a property owner, a business operator, a traveler, a grandmother who is actively involved in her grandchildren's lives, and a woman who refuses to be diminished by other people's assumptions about what I am capable of. The storage room incident taught me that respect is not automatically granted based on age, family relationships, or past sacrifices. Respect has to be claimed, maintained, and sometimes fought for, regardless of how old you are or how much you love the people who are withholding it from you. It also taught me that power used wisely can strengthen relationships instead of destroying them. When I revealed that I owned the house, I could have used that information to punish Jessica for her behavior or to assert control over my son's family. Instead, I used it as an opportunity to reset our relationships on a foundation of honesty and mutual understanding. Most importantly, it taught me that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, to correct misconceptions about who you are and what you're capable of, and to insist on being treated with the dignity that every person deserves. I think about that morning when Jessica told me my room would become storage, and I remember the feeling of powerlessness and humiliation that washed over me as I realized how little she thought of me. I remember thinking that maybe she was right, maybe I was just an inconvenient burden who should be grateful for whatever accommodation I was offered. But I also remember the moment when I decided that her assessment of my worth was not more important than my own knowledge of who I was and what I deserved. That moment of choosing my own dignity over her comfort was the moment everything changed, not just for our family, but for my understanding of myself. I am not the storage room woman that Jessica once tried to make me. I am Dorothy, 73 years old, property owner, business operator, family matriarch, and woman who learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is refuse to let them treat you badly. If you are listening to this story and you recognize yourself in any part of it, if you are being treated as less than you are, if you are accepting disrespect because you think you have no choice, if you are letting other people define your worth based on their assumptions about your limitations, I want you to know that you have more power than you realize. You have the power to insist on being treated with dignity. You have the power to correct misconceptions about who you are and what you deserve. You have the power to set boundaries, even with people you love, and especially when those boundaries